Daniel Cole had moved to Willow Bend 6 months ago, trading years of sand-colored war zones for quiet cul-de-sacs. After a decade in Delta Force, all he wanted was a house with a porch, a small garden, and silence that didn't carry the sound of gunfire. Willow Bend was the kind of place where neighbors waved, dogs barked at squirrels, and mailboxes had ribbons on holidays. He told himself that here, finally, nothing dangerous could reach him. At first, it seemed true. Every morning, he walked with a cup of coffee, nodding to the retired couple next door. Mrs. Hartley, who lived across the street, always greeted him with a warm smile and freshly cut roses. But beneath the neat lawns and white fences, something in this neighborhood was controlled. Rules were everywhere: what color your shutters could be, how tall your grass was allowed to grow, even where your trash bin could stand. The HOA enforced it like a kingdom guarding its crown. The first spark came when Daniel spoke up for Mrs. Hartley. She was fined because her lavender bushes were too wide and didn't fit the guidelines. She was 76. Those bushes had been growing there for 30 years, long before the current HOA board took over. Daniel had stood up at the meeting and calmly said, "This isn't a community if we punish kindness." The room went silent. Richard Hale, the HOA president, didn't like being challenged. Everyone could see it in the tight way his jaw clenched. Over the next few days, Daniel noticed small changes. People spoke more quietly when he walked by. The friendly waves turned stiff. A note appeared in his mailbox, handwritten, the letters pressed hard into the paper as if carved with irritation. "Some things are bigger than you. Walk away." He'd faced worse threats in places far less polite than this. He crumpled the note and threw it away. But part of him knew this wasn't the end. Friday evening came cold and still. Daniel sat on his porch with a cup of warm tea. The sun had disappeared behind the rooftops, leaving behind a silver moon. The streetlights glowed softly. It was too quiet. That was when he saw a black SUV circling the cul-de-sac like a shark testing the water. Its headlights dimmed as it slowed in front of his house. The engine cut off. Two men stepped out, dressed in dark uniforms. They walked with confidence, but not the kind he recognized. Their posture was forced, movements too rehearsed. Real law enforcement had a rhythm. This was a performance. They stopped in front of his door. One of them rapped on it sharply, 3 even knocks. "Mr. Cole," a voice called, "open up. This is law enforcement." Daniel didn't move. His instincts, honed through years of night raids and close calls, flared awake. He approached the door without making a sound and looked through the peephole. Two men. Their uniforms were dark but generic. The patches on their shoulders didn't match any department he knew. Their belts looked cheap, not standard issue. One man's jacket bulged slightly on his right side. Hidden object. Likely not a badge. "Step outside, sir. We need to ask you a few questions," the taller one commanded. Daniel didn't reply. He quietly reached for the porch light switch. The bulb flared to life outside, washing them in white light. The taller man flinched, just slightly. Real officers don't flinch when identified. One of them shifted his weight nervously. That was enough. They weren't who they claimed to be. Earlier that week, Daniel had overheard Richard Hale muttering after a board meeting, "He'll learn how this neighborhood works." He hadn't taken it seriously at the time. Now everything lined up like a chessboard. They weren't here randomly. Someone sent them. Daniel opened the door slowly. The cold night air brushed against his face as he stepped outside. His voice was calm, but it carried a weight that made most people pause. "Badges." Now, the taller man smirked and flashed something shiny but obviously fake. The shorter one didn't even try. His hand hovered near his jacket. Daniel kept his expression neutral. Years ago, he'd stood in much worse standoffs, ones where hesitation meant death. "This was nothing new, sir. Step down off the porch," the taller man said, his tone laced with authority he didn't earn. Daniel didn't move. His eyes narrowed, and his entire posture changed, not aggressive, but steady. It was the kind of stance that came from hundreds of missions, the kind that told people without words, "You're out of your depth." The shorter man stepped forward, fast but clumsy. He reached for Daniel's arm. Big mistake. Daniel moved faster. In less than 2 seconds, he grabbed the man's wrist, pivoted, and twisted it into a controlled lock. The man hit the porch floor before he could even yell. The second man lunged, but Daniel met him halfway. A swift movement, a well-placed strike, a sweep of the legs, and he was down too. Gasping as the night filled with the sound of bodies hitting the ground, they were both restrained with their own zip ties before they even understood what happened. Daniel stood over them, breathing steady, not a single drop of adrenaline wasted. He'd ended entire conflicts overseas faster than this. To him, it was just mechanics. Porch lights blinked on across the street. Curtains parted. Neighbors watched silently from their windows, their faces pale in the glow of the street lamps. The man they'd thought was just a quiet ex-soldier had just turned to would-be intimidators into a cautionary tale in under a minute. Daniel calmly called 911 when real officers arrived. Red and blue lights cut across the neat houses like sharp edges. The imposters didn't resist. They were too stunned. The officers separated them, checked their fake badges, and shook their heads. It didn't take long for the truth to spill out. Under questioning, one of the men broke down first. He admitted they'd been paid by someone on the HOA board to scare Daniel into backing off. They thought it would be easy. They thought he'd fold. They never imagined who they were dealing with. By morning, the neighborhood was buzzing. Word spread like wildfire. The HOA, once a quiet force everyone obeyed, was under a spotlight. Richard Hale avoided the street, but whispers followed him anyway. Nobody wanted to be the person who stood next to him anymore. An emergency HOA meeting was called. Every seat in the hall was filled, and people lined the walls. Daniel arrived quietly, taking a seat near the back. He didn't need to speak. The truth had already done the talking for him. Richard tried to deny everything, but the imposter's confessions, payment records, and the police report left no room for escape. The vote to remove him was nearly unanimous. One by one, the board members who had backed him turned their faces away. Fear no longer had a home here. The man who had ruled the neighborhood with threats and fines was suddenly just another homeowner, stripped of his power. In the weeks that followed, Willow Bend changed. Neighbors began to speak openly, not in whispers. People stopped living in quiet fear of small mistakes. Mrs. Hardley's lavender bushes bloomed without interference, swaying gently in the morning breeze. For the first time in years, the neighborhood felt like a community again, and on a soft Sunday evening, Daniel sat back on his porch with a cup of tea. The world around him was quiet, not the kind of quiet that hides danger, but the kind that carries peace. He didn't smile much, but there was a quiet pride in his chest. He hadn't sought a fight, but when it came to his door, he ended it in 60 seconds cleanly, without anger, and without fear. Sometimes, courage isn't about making noise. It's about standing still when others expect you to run. And that night, in a quiet neighborhood of painted fences and carefully trimmed lawns, one man's stillness changed everything.